Wonderful, thank you for that. And so our next question we'd like to ask is, how will working more hours affect the academic success of international students and students' quality of life and their chances of becoming permanent residents in Canada? And so I'll direct that question to Michal and Catherine. Michal, thank you.
Well, first, thank you very much for the invitation to do this, Margaret, and thank you to the people who've already responded. Excellent answers. I couldn't agree more that we can speculate about these effects. It's really hard to know without good quality data, and unfortunately, that's not there. As Catherine pointed out, the administrative data is just hopeless. We don't have work hours in the tax files. We don't have hourly wages in the tax files. We don't have occupations in the tax files. So where you'd want to get the data is from the labor force survey. I'm on an advisory committee at StatsCan on the labor force survey. I've been pushing them for months to start taking more seriously how we identify temporary residents, including international students in that data. There's a major data gap because of the way the sampling frame is designed in the labor force survey that we're quite simply missing them. That means that if you count up temporary resident the contribution of temporary residents to the Canadian labor force, we're probably at about 6% of total Canadian employment are now temporary residents. The vast majority of them are not captured in our labor force survey, which is like our main data. We measure things like labor shortages, which informs monetary policy. There's a big problem there. That I feel like it's getting bigger and it's being ignored. So what's the effect? Well, I mean, we could just speculate. Student success, what's the effect of this on student success? I have a project with IRCC that they're funding where we're linking student grades from an Ontario university, a very large Ontario university. That's one of the largest recruiters of international students. We're linking their grades, every graduating student from 2005 to 2022 with the IMDb, basically. So we have all their temporary resident permanents and all their permanent residency permits. We can see who is it that's staying, who's leaving. Is it the best students? Is it the worst students? In that data, ideally, we'd be able to see also what's happening in work hours and earnings, but we just don't have that yet. That's coming. In terms of PR status, well, I mean, we see what's happening. There's a lot of rhetoric from IRCC about skilled immigration. The reality is, in the past 2 years, we've very much moved towards we're shifting away from a skilled immigration program, economic class immigration program, to an unskilled. There's all kinds of changes on that front. So what it means, these kinds of changes we're seeing now combined with this shift towards unskilled immigration means that these pathways are increasing. It's becoming easier, which means the value of temporary resident permits, student visas, and work permits is increasing very much. The willingness to pay for these permits is increasing over time in a very significant way because those pathways are there. Migrants are realizing that they can get PR status more easily now than they used to be able to.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And Catherine.
Yeah, so I'm going to take the answer and focus really on the chances of success of becoming permanent residents. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different response than Michal, which is to say, I think that in terms of access to permanent residence, I think very few students are going to benefit from these particular policy changes. And so let me tell you a little bit about why. We all know we've seen big increases in international students enrolling in Canada, and particularly at the college level. And study at the college level doesn't really set people up for success in becoming eligible for permanent residence through economic immigration programs, since many of the programs do target people who have higher degrees and who work in high income occupations. Not exclusively, but many of the programs, that is the case. If we look at the kind of work international students are doing, there was a recent Statistics Canada paper which said that the top 2 sectors where international students are working are in accommodation and food service, as well as wholesale and retail trade. And few economic immigration programs are going to reward work in this sector. Of course, it's possible that some international students may be able to leverage this kind of increased hours in order to get a professional job, like a professional job that wouldn't have been available to them at kind of 20 hours or 15 hours a week. And then that sort of professional job could ease the pathway to permanent residence for those people. But I think few students are going to have that particular experience that I'm describing. So I see a couple of things. I see this disconnect between international students' work experience and the types of occupations that are typically rewarded in Canada's immigration system. But I also see a problem of numbers and a problem that's only appears to be getting worse. And there's simply not enough opportunities to immigrate compared to the number of international students who want to become permanent residents. So we know that in recent years, Canada has increased its planned immigration levels, but the growth in the international student population is outpacing the growth in the Levels Plan. And of course, the Levels Plan isn't simply, designed to transition international students to permanent residence. It's designed to meet this whole robust kind of immigration imperatives. But we also know that recent surveys show that a very high percentage of international students are hoping to seek permanent residence when they come here. And so that's what creates this kind of numbers problem. So I want to illustrate this a little bit. If we look at 2019, at the end of 2019, there were 640,000 international students in Canada, and there were 180,000 work permit holders who had previous study experience in Canada. So that's a total of 820,000 people who have study experience in Canada at the end of 2019. Over the course of that same year, 2019, 59,000 people with previous study experience transitioned to permanent residence. So if we look at that group of people, it would take until 2030 for 80% of that cohort, those people who were present in 2019, to get permanent residence if the transition rate stayed the same. Of course, we know there was the subsequent temporary TR to PR pathway, which did allow kind of a group of international students to make that transition. But that's a temporary program, and it doesn't address this long-term disparity in numbers in terms of how many international students are here, how many international students want to get permanent residence, and what are the actual opportunities to do so. So, kind of to bring it back to the change in working hours, it does help address this issue of parity and like work parity with domestic students who aren't facing kind of similar restrictions. But the changes don't address some of the core issues in the international student program and some of those core things that are causing the vulnerabilities that we've been seeing called out in the media with in particular intensity in the last year or so. So, oversight of international student recruitment, false expectations about immigration opportunities, and just the lack of transparent pathways to permanent residence for most international students.
Excellent. Thank you, Kath.